So early on as a filmmaker, I did a lot of small jobs. I was shooting weddings, bar mitzvah intro videos, local TV commercials, not very glamorous jobs, but they taught me a lot about what it means to be a creative and how to be a filmmaker. The one thing I didn't learn was how to be a great leader, because when you're working on some of these small shoots, oftentimes I'm doing everything. I'm filming with 2 cameras. I'm monitoring the audio. I'm conducting the interview. The list goes on, from producing, directing, doing the sound. You have to do it all early on because you just don't have a budget. And then as I started to get more and more experience, I started to build out my portfolio. I was starting to take on bigger and bigger projects, which meant bigger budgets, which meant I had to hire other people to help me. And I was not prepared for what it means to be a leader on some of these jobs. Adam Sjoberg is a documentary and commercial filmmaker that's traveled to over 60 countries, working on both independent and full-scale productions. Cool, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
On our podcast episode together, we talk about the growing pains and mistakes you can make as you enter a position of leadership for the first time.
It forces you to have to deal with your insecurities, because everyone has them. And I think some directors will, to make up for the fact that they're insecure or to avoid getting pushback, they'll become like maniacal and just like be an asshole on set or just be non-collaborative. And then there's other people that will just unnecessarily cave to anything that their crew or editor wants. And I think that there's sort of a in between of knowing that you have a point of view and there's a reason you're directing this thing, but also being willing to kind of have that feedback and know that you hired your DP for a reason too. And that's because your DP is good. You know, I worked with an editor when we were working, trying to get to Picture Lock, and I am an editor as well. I've edited a lot of my own stuff, and we were just like 3 a.m, stressed out, frustrated, not communicating the best. And she's at the wheel, but I'm like trying to explain to her something that I wanted her to do, and I can't even remember what it was at this point. And I was like, can I just take the wheel for a second? And she let me, and I like quickly did what I was trying to explain to her, but I felt like icky, like felt bad that I had done that. And I apologized to her the next day. Like we eventually like all went to bed, and it was just like, okay, it's too late to be working right now. And the next day I was like, I'm sorry yesterday that I like took the keyboard away from you. And she was like, yeah, you know, she's like, it's fine. But she was like, there's something to learning how to articulate what you want to your crew. Like that is something you have to learn. That isn't something that just comes naturally. And I took that to heart, and I've really, working with an editor on docs, that I've applied that to working on set, whether it's with actors or with a larger crew, on commercial projects, on other stuff. That's a really important skill to hone, is not to just assume that everyone can read your mind. And when you're doing the run and gun smaller stuff where you're editing, directing, and producing the whole thing, shooting the whole thing, you can just live in your own head and you know what you mean. But learning how to talk about what you mean is it's not easy, and you have to practice it.
Yeah, and I think it starts at the beginning. It's like letting that crew know. And I've certainly made this mistake before, where for commercial stuff or even doc stuff, where we set out and my crew only has a vague idea of what we're shooting that day, or a vague idea of what the big picture is. Yeah. And that stuff is important because I think the crew, first of all, just wants to know that they're a part of something. They want to know, it matters what I'm filming. It matters what I'm creating and what I'm recording sound for. So that's important. But then also, like, just to then when something comes up, when a question comes up later, like, well, why do we want to shoot this interview in this sit down way when we could do it this way? It's like, oh, because that's what, every other interview was like during this doc, or like, it all makes sense because you already articulated what you wanted from the very beginning. Yeah. Which isn't always so straightforward. I mean, it's always a learning lesson. And I think that's the thing, like you said, you just can't have an ego about it. Yeah. You just have to be able to listen to other people, take people's advice, and know how to communicate.
Yeah, you have to, I remember watching at Austin Film Festival, I saw P.T. Anderson and Jonathan Demme interview each other. 2 great directors, not P.T. Anderson's never made docs, but Jonathan Demme's made a ton of docs. Both of them have very different styles of working. And P.T. Anderson's sort of the auteur, where he's like, I have my point of view, and I'm going to just tell everyone to fall in line. Whereas Jonathan Demme is very collaborative. And a lot of his films, like Rachel Getting Married, are kind of doc style, where he doesn't have there's not a script per se. And I remember thinking about those two things, and I'm like, I don't want to be a full Jonathan Demme, and I don't want to be a full P.T. Anderson. Like, I want to be able to be a bit of an auteur where I do have a vision. I know what I want, and people are confident that even when it seems crazy, I know what this guy can do, and I trust that he's going to make the right decisions, even though I maybe can't picture it. But I also, if there's a problem, I want to like collaborate on how to solve it, or if there's, and that's where Jonathan Demme pointed out, is he's like, if there's a problem on set, it's usually not one person's problem. Like, it's usually not one person went awry. It's usually like several people or some circumstance or some line that isn't working, and gathering the team and saying, okay, how can we make this scene work? Whether that's on a doc, in an interview, or on a feature, like, I think that a certain amount of collaboration is crucial.
When you step into the role as a leader for the very first time, it's easy to get defensive. I remember back to the first time that I worked on some of these 10, 15 person shoots or productions. And early on, I was only thinking about myself. I wanted to make sure that people thought I was smart and creative and funny, and I had all the right things to say, and that I had a vision. But the problem is, when you encounter difficulties on a shoot, when things come up that you don't expect, and that's going to happen on every single shoot, you need to work as a team to resolve these problems. And the only way that you're going to do that is by listening to the experts that you hire. I think sometimes we think of leaders in this very narrow mindset, very charismatic, very over the top. They certainly can be good leaders, but I've also known leaders to be quiet and thoughtful, those that ask really good questions, those that listen to people and have and create a very welcoming, productive, creative environment. And those have been my favorite leaders and the people that I continue to want to work with. Because at the end of the day, I don't care if you are the most brilliant filmmaker of all time, if you're an asshole. I want to work with nice people. I want to work with people that make me feel good about myself and the projects that I'm working on. The Ground Up Show is a podcast that inspires creatives to make things happen. It's available on your favorite podcasting app. Go to groundupshow.com to get all the links.